A man knows when something's off. The way she laughed too hard at her phone, the sudden taste for late-night drives, the fresh perfume when she was just running errands. I ignored it until I couldn't. My name is Carter Garcia. I'm 48 years old. Ex-bouncer, now running private security in Austin, Texas. Built like a brick wall, shaved head, inked up to the elbow. People call me blunt. I call it telling the truth. My job is to keep people safe, family, friends, anyone in my circle. And I do it without hesitation. But the one person I let my guard down for just put a knife in my back. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there a second watching the porch light flicker. Charlotte was inside, probably on the couch, scrolling through her phone with that blank expression she got when she thought I wasn't looking. The kids were at her parents' place for the weekend. I should have been looking forward to a quiet night with my wife. Instead, my gut felt like concrete. A few hours earlier, I followed the feeling. There wasn't a single piece of hard proof, just instinct. That's all I needed. She said she was going out for a drive. Needed some air. It wasn't the first time lately. So, I let her leave, waited 5 minutes, then checked the GPS tracker I'd installed on her SUV a few years back. Standard security measure, or at least that's what I told myself then. Now, it was proving useful in ways I never wanted. She didn't drive aimlessly. She went straight across town, pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind a bar I knew damn well. Tommy Reynolds, her high school sweetheart, worked there. Last I'd heard, he was still bartending, still clinging to the glory days. A guy whose biggest accomplishment was a touchdown 30 years ago. I parked down the street, far enough not to be seen, and watched. 5 minutes. 10. Then she got out of the car, looked around like she was checking for traffic, and slipped inside through the back entrance. I didn't need to see what happened next. I'd seen enough. Now, I sat in my truck, staring at the front door of the house I paid for, the life I built, knowing it was all about to come apart. But I wasn't the kind of man who wallowed. I didn't break down. I didn't rage. I just breathed, let the truth settle into my bones, and got out of the truck. Inside, Charlotte was curled up on the couch, barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She glanced up from her phone, barely registering me. "Hey," she said, voice flat. I dropped my keys on the counter. "How was your drive?" Something flickered in her eyes, a hesitation so quick most men would miss it. I didn't. Fine. Just needed to clear my head. I walked to the fridge, pulled out a beer, twisted the cap off, and took a slow sip. "You see anyone while you were out?" Another pause. She shook her head, glancing back at her phone. "Nope." That was the moment I knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was gone. Not just physically, but the woman I married, the woman I built a life with, had checked out long before she ever set foot in that bar. And I'd been too damn busy working, too damn trusting, to see it. I didn't say another word. I sat down across from her, took another sip of beer, and watched. She didn't notice. Didn't care. Just kept scrolling. I finished my drink, tossed the bottle in the trash, and grabbed my Carteret. "Where are you going?" she asked, finally looking up. "To see a man about a divorce." She blinked. "What?" I didn't repeat myself. I just walked out the door, shutting it behind me. The office was in a quiet part of town, tucked between a bail bonds place and a bar that never seemed to close. I'd known David Marks for years, served in the Marines with him before he got out, went to law school, and started handling the kind of cases that needed a steady hand and a cold heart. Divorce was just one of the many knives he sharpened for a living. I pushed through the glass door, the little bell overhead jingling. The receptionist barely looked up. She knew me. Knew I didn't come here unless something serious needed handling. David was behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loose. Late 50s, still built like he could throw a man through a wall. He looked up from a thick stack of papers, took one look at me, and nodded toward the chair across from him. "Bad night?" Saturday could be worse." He leaned back, studying me. "That look on your face says otherwise." I tapped my fingers against the armrest, took a slow breath. "Need to start the process. Charlotte's been seeing someone." His mouth pressed into a straight line, the closest thing to sympathy he ever gave. "You sure?" I nodded. "Saw it myself." "Good," he said, already reaching for a folder. "Makes it easier. Texas is a no-fault state, but if we can show adultery, we can make sure she walks away with nothing." "How clean is the financial situation?" "House is in my name. Business too. Only joint account is for bills." He smirked. "Smart man. That helps. We'll get temporary orders in place, lock down assets. If she tries to pull anything, she's out of luck." I watched as he wrote, steady, methodical, like he was planning an operation. That's what this was, an extraction mission. Getting her out of my life with minimal damage. He looked up. "You want custody of the kids?" I thought about it. Not an easy answer. They're old enough to make their own decisions. I won't force them. But I'm not letting her drag them through whatever mess she's about to make. Fair enough. He tapped his pen against the desk. Anything else you want? I thought about that too. What did I want? Revenge? No. That wasn't my style. Justice? Maybe. Mostly, I just wanted her gone. Just get it done, I said, standing up. David nodded. Consider it handled. The night air hit sharp as I stepped outside. I lit a cigarette, took a slow drag, let the smoke settle. The street was quiet, neon lights buzzing from the liquor store across the road. I was about to walk to my truck when a familiar yellow cab pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Well, if it ain't the meanest son of a bitch I know, Mickey Doyle said, his scruffy beard catching the glow of the dashboard lights. I exhaled, flicked the cigarette away, and got in. Drive. He pulled away from the curb, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming against the dashboard. You got that look? What look? The one guys get when they just found out the woman they put a ring on ain't worth the metal it's made of. I didn't answer. Didn't have to. Mickey sighed, shaking his head. Hate to say it, but I saw this coming. That got my attention. The hell does that mean? He glanced over, eyes sharp beneath that old cap he always wore. Charlotte's been acting different for a while. People notice things, Carter. The late-night drives. The way she started dressing when you weren't around. Like she was trying to be 25 again. I didn't say anything 'cause it ain't my business. But now he shrugged. Now it is. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't wrong. I should have seen it sooner. Mickey took a turn, weaving through back streets, always knowing the quickest way anywhere. So, what's the plan? It's handled, I said. He snorted. You and I got different definitions of handled. I didn't respond. Just stared out the window as the city blurred past. The weight in my chest wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder. Something final. Mickey let the silence hang a beat before speaking again. Let me give you some free advice. Don't let her play the victim. Women like that? They'll flip the script before you can blink. Suddenly, you're the bad guy and she's the poor, neglected wife. I looked at him. You think I don't know that? He smirked. Just making sure. 'Cause I got a feeling Charlotte's not gonna go quietly. He wasn't wrong about that either. The house was quiet when I got back. Charlotte wasn't on the couch anymore, but I could hear the shower running upstairs. I didn't go up. Didn't need to. Instead, I grabbed another beer from the fridge and leaned against the counter, looking around the place. The photos on the wall, the furniture we picked together, the little details that made it a home. It all felt like a goddamn museum now, like I was standing in a place that belonged to someone else. I cracked open the beer, took a slow sip, and let the silence settle. I had a plan. No second chances, no drawn-out fights. She was done. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I got up before dawn like I always did. Routine didn't change even if everything else had. Workout, shower, coffee, and by the time I was lacing up my boots, Charlotte was just rolling out of bed. She barely looked at me as she walked past, heading straight for the kitchen. She poured herself coffee, took a sip, and sighed like she was already exhausted. Didn't hear you coming last night. Didn't think you'd care. Her eyes flicked to mine, quick and sharp, but she didn't bite. She just leaned against the counter, staring into her mug. You were serious about the divorce? Yeah. She laughed under her breath. Just like that. Just like that. She shook her head, setting the mug down a little too hard. You're unbelievable. You don't even want to talk about it? Work through it. I took a sip of coffee. Were you planning to talk it through before you spread your legs for Tommy? That hit? Her face twisted for half a second before she schooled it into something colder. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and slid it across the counter. A grainy photo of her walking into the bar, a timestamp that lined up perfectly with her so-called drives. Her face drained. You had me followed? No. I followed you. She swallowed, crossing her arms. You don't understand, I understand plenty. I leaned in, voice low, steady. I understand you checked out a long time ago. I understand you lied every time you looked me in the eye and said you were happy. And I understand you thought you'd get away with it. She scoffed. So that's it? You just decide I'm the villain and you're the saint. I don't need to decide anything, Charlotte. You made your choice. She pressed her lips together, shaking her head like she couldn't believe this was happening. But there was no fight left in her. Just guilt and frustration, two things she'd never admit to. I grabbed my keys off the counter. You should probably start packing. She didn't say anything as I walked out. Later that day, I made a few calls. I wasn't about to let her slink away quietly playing the wounded wife. People needed to know. Her parents. Our close friends. The people who'd been in our lives for years. I called up Charlotte's mom first. Lorraine had always been polite, but we weren't close. Still, she deserved to hear it from me. She answered on the third ring. Carter? Everything okay? Not really. I kept it straight, no theatrics. Charlotte's been having an affair. I filed for divorce this morning. Silence. Then a slow, unsteady breath. Are you sure? I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. Another pause. Then a soft, tired voice. I'm sorry. Not your fault. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just figured you should hear it from me instead of her trying to spin it some other way. More silence. Then quietly, thank you. One by one, I made the calls. Some people were shocked. Some weren't. Most didn't know what to say. But they all knew now. There was no covering it up. No rewriting the truth. By the time I was done, I felt lighter. Not good, not satisfied, just lighter. Like I'd finally set something down that had been weighing on me for too damn long. That night, I sat out on the back porch with a drink in hand, staring at the dark sky. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The kind that meant something was over. And I was just getting started. The next few days passed in a blur of logistics. Lawyers, bank transfers, making sure everything was lined up so Charlotte wouldn't be able to weasel her way into taking a dime more than she was legally owed, which, thanks to Texas law and a little foresight on my part, wasn't much. I wasn't leaving her destitute, but I sure as hell wasn't about to let her coast off my work while she played around with Tommy Reynolds like some bored teenager reliving prom night. Charlotte, for her part, didn't try to grovel. Didn't try to fight it either. I think she thought if she kept quiet, I'd cool off, that maybe I'd let her stay in the house for the sake of appearances. She was wrong. The day after I filed, she packed a couple of suitcases and left without a word, slamming the front door behind her like that gave her the last word. It didn't. I let the dust settle, gave it a few days before making my next move. That's how you do these things, slow, methodical. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or drunken bar fights. I wanted precision. So I made some calls. First was to a friend of mine, Danny King, who owned a couple of bars around town. Need a favor, I told him. Anything. No hesitation. I laid it out plain. Charlotte's been screwing Tommy Reynolds. You know anyone who can make sure word gets around? Danny let out a low whistle. Damn, Carter. That's a mess. I know. He didn't ask if I was sure. Didn't tell me to let it go. He just sighed. Yeah, I'll take care of it. Give it a week. People will know. That was enough for me. The second call was to Tommy's wife, Emma. I'd thought about not calling her, about letting her find out through the grapevine, but something about that didn't sit right. She deserved to hear it straight. She answered on the first ring. Hey, Carter, what's up? I kept my voice steady. We need to talk. Something in my tone must have tipped her off because she got quiet fast. Okay, I told her. Plain and simple, no fluff, no softening the blow. Just the facts. Tommy and Charlotte. The bar. The late nights. Emma didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just let out a long breath like someone who'd been holding something heavy for too long, finally setting it down. I had a feeling, she said, voice flat. Didn't want to believe it, but yeah. I'm sorry. Don't be, she muttered. I should be thanking you. We sat in silence for a second before she spoke again. What are you gonna do? Already doing it. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Well, if you need a witness in court, you know where to find me. I'll keep that in mind. The last thing I did was set the stage for the real confrontation. I wanted it to hit where it hurt the most, somewhere public, somewhere Charlotte wouldn't be able to spin the narrative in her favor. A clean break wasn't enough. She had to own it, had to look in the faces of the people she'd lied to and see them staring back with nothing but judgment. So I set up a dinner. A little gathering at a steakhouse we used to go to with friends and family. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone. I made sure Charlotte would be there. Made sure Tommy would be too. And I made damn sure they had no idea what was coming. The night of, I walked in with my head high, calm, controlled. The place was packed, a mix of familiar faces and regulars who'd been eating at that place for years. Charlotte was already there, sitting at the far end of the table, putting on that tight-lipped smile she wore when she was pretending everything was fine. Tommy sat next to her, looking around like he knew something was off but couldn't quite place it. I took my seat, nodded to the waitress, ordered my usual. Let the conversation flow. People laughed, talked about work, the kids, the same old small-town gossip that never changed. And then, when the moment was right, I leaned forward, placed my hands on the table, and looked Charlotte dead in the eye. How long? I asked. The table went quiet. Dead quiet. Charlotte blinked. What? How long? I repeated, voice calm, steady, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Have you been screwing Tommy? Someone gasped. A fork clattered onto a plate. Charlotte went pale, eyes darting around the table. Carter, she hissed, not here. Why not? I asked. You weren't exactly worried about privacy before. Tommy stiffened in his chair. Listen, man, I turned my head, met his eyes, and whatever he was about to say died in his throat. Save it, I said. Charlotte's mom, who'd been sitting across from us, dropped her napkin onto the table. Charlotte. Her voice was quiet, disbelieving, like she was still hoping it wasn't true. Charlotte swallowed hard. Mom, Oh my God, Emma said, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You're actually not gonna deny it. That's when the murmurs started. That's when Charlotte realized there was no crawling out of this hole. I stood, threw a few bills on the table to cover my meal, and glanced back at Charlotte one last time. You should probably get used to eating alone. Then I walked out, letting the weight of it all crash down behind me. I didn't look back when I walked out of that steakhouse. Didn't care to see Charlotte's face crumple or Tommy shrinking into his seat like a kid caught stealing from the till. The damage was done. The truth was out in the open, exactly where it needed to be. The night air was cool, the kind that carried the smell of barbecue and cigarette smoke, the distant hum of live music floating from bars down the street. I lit a cigarette and took a long drag, letting the nicotine settle the last bit of tension in my chest. A minute later, the door swung open behind me. I knew who it was before I turned around. Emma. She stepped up beside me, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Hell of a scene you just made in there. Figured it was about time. She let out a breath, running a hand through her hair. You know she's gonna try to play the victim now, right? Make it out like you ambushed her, embarrassed her. She can spin it however she wants. I flicked ash from my cigarette. Facts don't change. Emma smirked. Yeah, well, I gotta say, watching her squirm like that, worth every second. I nodded. You holding up? She scoffed. Please. This is the best thing that could have happened. I was married to a man who peaked in high school and still talks about that one game like it's a war story. Should have left years ago. She meant it. I could hear it in her voice. The anger was real, but so was the relief. She shifted, tilting her head at me. What about you? What now? I took another drag, exhaled slow. Already started the process. Divorce will be final soon. After that? I move on. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Good. A car pulled up to the curb, Mickey's cab. He rolled down the window, grinning. That went about how I expected. Emma laughed, shaking her head. I like this guy. Most people don't, I said, flicking my cigarette away. Mickey snorted. Most people ain't got taste. You need a ride or just out here for the ambience? I glanced back at the restaurant, at the shadow of Charlotte still sitting at that table, head down, people whispering around her. That wasn't my problem anymore. I pulled open the door and got in. Emma gave me a quick nod before heading back inside, probably to finish what was left of Tommy. Mickey pulled away from the curb, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming against the dashboard. So what's next, big guy? You gonna hole up and drink whiskey for a week, or you got a real plan? It's handled, I said, watching the city roll past. He snorted. You keep saying that. I still don't know what the hell it means. It means I don't waste time crying over people who don't deserve it. Damn, Mickey muttered, shaking his head. You ever think about writing fortune cookies? I smirked. The first real smirk in a while. Mickey turned onto a quieter street, then side-eyed me. So, you hear about Tommy? I leaned back, resting my arm on the door. What about him? Mickey chuckled. Danny King's boys made sure his boss got wind of what went down. Seems like customers don't want their drinks served by a guy who screws married women. He got canned this afternoon. I let that sit for a second. Not surprised. Just satisfied. That's so. Yep. Mickey whistled low. Word travels fast when you burn the wrong bridges. Tommy's out of a job, his wife's leaving him, and I'd bet money he won't show his face in that bar again. I just nodded. No gloating. No laughing. Just another loose end tied up. Mickey pulled up in front of my house, letting the engine idle. You need anything else? No, I opened the door, stepped out. Appreciate the ride. He tipped his cap. Anytime, brother. The cab rumbled off down the street, taillights glowing red in the dark. I stood there for a moment, looking up at the house. My house. The weight that had been pressing on me for months was gone. The house didn't feel like a trap anymore. It was just a place. A damn good one, too. I walked up the steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was quiet. But for the first time in a long time, it was the right kind of quiet. A week later, I was in the courthouse, sitting on a hard wooden bench, watching Charlotte shift uncomfortably across from me. She looked smaller than usual, like she'd finally realized this was real, that there was no sweet-talking her way back into control. She'd shown up alone. Her parents weren't there. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't backing her. Her lawyer, some slick-looking guy in a cheap suit, was whispering something in her ear. She nodded, but her face was tight, jaw clenched. She was mad. Not sad. Not regretful. Just pissed that things hadn't gone her way. Good. David sat next to me, flipping through a folder, calm as ever. He barely glanced up. This'll go quick. She's got no real leverage. I know. She had tried to fight for the house, for more money, for whatever she could claw back. But between the pre-existing agreements, the evidence, and the fact that Texas law wasn't kind to cheating spouses, she didn't have a leg to stand on. The judge called us in. The room was small, just a few rows of seats, nothing flashy. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. Paperwork was signed. Statements made. No dramatic speeches. No tears. And then it was done. Charlotte didn't look at me as we left. She just grabbed her bag, walked out fast, heels clicking against the tile like she had somewhere important to be. David exhaled, tucking his folder under his arm. That's that. I nodded. That's that. We stepped outside, the afternoon sun blinding for a second. I took a breath. The air felt different. David clapped me on the shoulder. You need anything, you call me. I will. He gave me a look, the kind only an old friend can get away with. You did the right thing, Carter. I nodded, but I already knew that. After he left, I stood there for a second, taking in the city around me. The noise, the traffic, the rhythm of people moving like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. A few nights later, the town was hosting a fundraiser for the local youth center, the one I'd been helping out with for years. I didn't go for recognition, didn't care for speeches or handshakes, but I put in the work, and when the head of the program called to invite me personally, I figured why not. The hall was packed, people milling around in suits and boots, the kind of gathering where the old-timers talked about the good old days and the younger crowd pretended to listen. I stuck to the back, nursing a drink, listening. At some point, the director, an older guy named Rick, got on stage and started rattling off the names of people who'd contributed. Business owners, community leaders, familiar faces. Then he said my name. People clapped. Some nodded in my direction. A few patted me on the back. It wasn't much, but it was something. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard a voice. You don't know how lucky you are. I turned. It was Emma. She stepped up next to me, looking out over the crowd, a glass of whiskey in her hand. You got out clean, she said, taking a sip. Me? I got a deal with Tommy begging me to take him back every other day. I smirked. He's got some nerve. Always did. She shook her head, amused. Not that it matters. He's done. People won't touch him now. That was the idea. She gave me a look. You really don't let anything slide, do you? I shrugged. Not when it comes to loyalty. She studied me for a second, then clinked her glass against mine. To loyalty, then. We drank. An hour later, I was outside, leaning against my truck, breathing in the night air. The stars were out, the kind of sky you only got in Texas, wide, endless, stretching out past anything that mattered. Mickey's cab pulled up. He rolled down the window, grinning. What's with the suit? You finally running for mayor? I shook my head. Hell no. Good. Town's got enough crooks. He nodded toward the passenger seat. Where to? I opened the door, slid in, and let the seat creak under my weight. Anywhere but back. Mickey grinned. Now you're talking. The cab pulled away from the curb, tires rolling smooth over the pavement. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking in the rearview. A month later, I was back at the gym, wrapping my hands before a training session. The place smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and determination. The kind of place where men came to work, not to take selfies. I'd been coming here for years, running drills with younger guys, some of them ex-military, some of them just looking for structure. Felt good to hit something again. Danny King walked in, tossed his bag onto the bench next to me. Heard from Charlotte lately? I smirked, shaking my head. Not a damn word. She's still in town? Doubt it. Last I heard, she was crashing with a friend on the other side of the city. Tommy's out too. Moved back in with his parents. Danny snorted. Hell of a downgrade. Deserved. He nodded, lacing up his gloves. You ever wonder if she regrets it? I tightened the wrap around my wrist. Doesn't matter. And it didn't. Maybe she did regret it, maybe she didn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. The court papers had come through 2 weeks ago, finalized without a hitch. Charlotte didn't fight. She couldn't. She walked away with her car, some personal belongings, and nothing else. No house, no money, no backup plan. Just the fallout of her own decisions. Tommy had tried reaching out once, some half-assed attempt at apologizing, but I didn't even let him get a full sentence out before I hung up. Men like him, they never really change. They just look for another way to weasel back into something comfortable. Not my job to stop him, just my job to make sure he was done in my world. At the gym, I finished wrapping my hands, stood up, and rolled my shoulders. A couple of younger guys were already in the ring, throwing punches, working on their footwork. I watched for a second before stepping in. "All right," I said, cracking my neck. "Who wants to go first?" They hesitated, looking at each other. One of them, a kid named Caleb, about 20, finally stepped forward. "I'll take a round." I nodded. "Good. Come at me." He squared up, moved in fast, but not fast enough. I deflected, redirected, made him work for it. He was strong, but he needed control. Too wild, I told him, dodging a sloppy jab. "You don't just throw punches. You plan them." He nodded, adjusting, focusing. He learned quick. That was good. The next hour passed in sweat, bruises, and corrections. It felt right, drilling fundamentals, reminding them that real power wasn't in brute force but in knowing when to strike. When the session wrapped up, Mickey was waiting outside the gym, leaning against his cab, smoking a cigarette. "You got a habit of showing up uninvited," I said, grabbing a water bottle from my bag. He grinned. "You'd miss me if I didn't." I rolled my eyes, took a long drink. "What do you want?" He flicked ash onto the ground. "Just came from King's Bar." "You know who showed up?" I raised a brow. "Charlotte." I didn't react. Mickey smirked. "She sat at the bar for a while, didn't talk to nobody, just nursed a drink like she was waiting on something." "Waiting on what?" He shrugged. "Hell if I know. Maybe hoping somebody'd come over and tell her she wasn't the bad guy." "Didn't happen." He took another drag. "She left alone." I let that sit for a second. Then I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder. "She can sit in every bar in town for all I care." "That's what I thought you'd say." Mickey opened the cab door, climbed in. "So what now?" I looked out at the street, at the city stretching out in front of me, wide open. "Now?" I exhaled slow, feeling the weight completely gone. "Now I live." Mickey grinned, pulling away from the curb. I didn't look back.